Plantation life was a big role for women in the Civil War. The rate of death among slaves was high. To replace their losses, plantation owners encouraged the slaves to have children. This started as early as the age of 13, and by 20, the woman slaves would be expected to have 4 or 5 children. To encourage slaves who had been through the mill, plantation owners promised women freedom after they had produced 15 children.
Even though conditions were not good for the working class in the North, factories held a promise for many: employment, the possibility of advancement, and cheaper goods.
By 1860, both the North and the South were moving toward systems of mass production. In the North, factories were building up quickly. In the South, plantations were developing. In surprising ways, these systems resembled each other in their attempt at mass production. The similarities helped workers realize the country needed to improve the treatment of its workforce. The differences must have made Southerners feel it would be hard to let go of a system that the entire economy depended on. After the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, slaveholding women across Georgia pushed the men of their families to support secession by appealing their sense of duty to their family. The role of slaveholding women was difficult to fulfill because of slaves' increasingly defiant attitudes towards women, because of society's doubts and women's insecurities about how much they are capable of managing. This made women very fit to be tied. When the hostilities began, many women encouraged their husbands to enlist by appealing to their manhood and sense of honor. Single women publicly declared that they would date or marry only those who volunteered to serve.
Slaveholding women had difficulty battling crop production, slave management, shortage of food and clothing, inflation, and the presence of federal armies. This made them chief cooks and bottle washers. They pleaded for their husbands to return home so they can assume control of the plantation affairs, and they also wanted the masculine protection in order to make their slaves work successfully. Slaveholding women managed to clothe and feed their children by requesting a salary position in a government office. Confederate officials looked beyond their gender and filled many positions with women. Working conditions were safer in Confederate office buildings than in factories.
Poor women were more vulnerable to the war's devastation than slaveholding women. Many experienced food shortages and had fewer resources when they were left on their own.
A Civil War soldier's chance of not surviving the war was about 1 in 4. These fallen men were cared for by a woefully underqualified, understaffed, and undersupplied medical corps. Although Civil War sawbones were commonly referred to as butchers by their patients and the press, they managed to treat more than 10 million cases of injury and illness in just 48 months, and most did it with as much compassion and ability as possible. The USSC was a civilian-run national relief organization that sent food, clothing, medical supplies, and white female nurses to military hospitals. This organization enlisted more female volunteers than any other northern organization. Every effort was made to treat wounded men within 48 hours. Most primary care was administered at field hospitals located far beyond the front lines. Those who survived were then transported by unreliable and overcrowded ambulances, which were 2-wheeled carts or 4-wheeled wagons, to army hospitals located in nearby cities and towns. Those who survived their wounds and surgeries still had another hurdle, however: the high risk of infection. While most surgeons were aware of a relationship between cleanliness and low infection rates, they did not know how to sterilize their equipment. Due to a frequent shortage of water, surgeons often went days without washing their hands or instruments, thereby passing germs from one patient to another as they treated them. Despite these fearful odds, nearly 75% of all amputees survived.
Throughout the war, both the South and the North struggled to improve the level of medical care given up to their men. In many ways, their efforts assisted in the birth of modern medicine in the United States. More complete records on medical and surgical activities were kept during the war than ever before. Doctors became more proficient at surgery, at the use of anesthesia, and perhaps most importantly, a greater understanding of the relationship between cleanliness, diet, and the disease was gained not only by the medical establishment, but by the public at large. Another important advance took place in the field of nursing. Respect for the role of women in medicine rose greatly among both doctors and patients. Dorothea Dix and Clara Barton were the leaders of a national effort to organize a nursing corps to care for the war's wounded and sick. Dorothea Dix was already recognized for her hard work in improving the treatment received by the insane when she began to recruit women to serve as nurses in the Army Medical Bureau. Clara Barton personally funded many of the organization operations when she couldn't get government support. One surgeon, Mary Walker, was awarded the nation's highest honor by President Andrew Jackson, was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor.
When a wounded soldier wanted to send a letter to his family, women volunteering in war hospitals and visiting prisons often served as secondary function. They did this to ensure that those who were ill or wounded had the necessary materials and help for writing letters. Women serving as nurses, as well as those who wanted to help but had not yet developed nursing skills, were expected to take dictation from those who, because of illness, injury, or illiteracy, could not write themselves.
Almost every soldier in service made an effort to write letters home to describe their experience, give their opinions on local matters and politics, to assure their families not to worry. But not all soldiers could write very well or spell words properly. Rural education for soldiers was usually only up to the 4th grade level. Many young men from rural areas had never attended school and could neither read nor write, so they asked comrades or women to write letters for them. Poor education led to many words being misspelled or sentences left incomplete. Soldiers sometimes spelt words as they heard them, which left a lot of letters hard to read. Sometimes soldiers described battles, but more often they wrote about their daily existence and desire to be home. Soldiers in every war our nation has fought in have written home from the battlefront.
Sewing bees served as a primary social gathering for women. Both North and the South women organized sewing bee in an effort to sew and knit uniforms, blankets, flags, and tents, and to provide feasts for soldiers. As they gathered together to sew flags for their soldiers, women developed organizations that contributed to support of their men in the Union and Confederate armies.
Women not only sewed and quilted, but also discovered family affairs, cooking, and other life experiences. On certain occasions, sewing bees functioned as entertainment, where people gathered and celebrated with singing and dancing. Sewing gave a woman to participate in the war and was a way to contribute and support their efforts. Many of the northern women who were involved in the sewing circles were usually of the upper and middle class. Women that were members in the South were usually slaveholding women or plantation mistresses who were assigned to sew new tents.
Sewing circles excluded black women even in the North. The Civil War significantly impacted women to work together in order to help a cause which transformed Southern women to be united. The women of both the North and the South made an effort to build thousands of monuments from the Civil War in cemeteries, battlefield sites, parks, city streets, and town squares. Citizens also built monuments for individual women who had a big impact and made a great deal of efforts and sacrifices during the war. Southerners had a big role in monuments than the North did. Northern women served in supporting roles for monuments, while Southerners were the ones who led much of the building. Authorities found it more acceptable for women to make monuments for their heroes, which is why many women became memorializers.
If a spy was caught, they were usually treated like a common criminal. The penalty for being a spy was most often death by public hanging, although many spies begged to be shot to death, which was considered to be a more honorable way to go. Young boys that were spies were hanged as well, but there is no record of a female spy ever being hanged. Although there was one jailbird sentence, she got away.
Although women were not allowed to serve in the army, that did not stop them from toeing the mark. Some women would not discontinue from disguising themselves as buff men and taking up arms. Women would create masculine names and hide their identity from officials. On occasion, their sex was revealed. While Mary Owens was in the army and after being shot and had been to the hospital, they realized she was a woman, and upon returning home, she was also welcomed warmly.
Sarah Emma Edmonds was a Canadian-born woman who served with the Union Army for 2 years while she pretended to be a man and act as a hard case, going by the name Frank. 400 women had tried to disguise as hard-knock men, and Sarah Edmonds was one who was successful.
Sarah Edmonds, you have to be quiet. Mary Owens, where are you taking me?
You'll see.
Okay, we need somewhere where no one can see us.
How about this? Is this good?
No. Look behind, there are people here.
Oh, alright. I have another plan.
Alright, let's get there quick.
Alright, we're here. Ready?
Ready.
Look, there's people heading down the river.
Oh my God, we have to tell the general! Look, there's people here. Shit, what?
We have to be quiet.
Fuck! Kane is in the building, nigga.